where sparks fly between them, the electrician and the homeowner. WLW love story. The house was completely dark when Maya's hand slipped on the wet basement stairs. And in that split second of falling through blackness, she thought about how fitting it was that her life had become this, stumbling blindly through spaces she thought she knew, surrounded by shadows she couldn't control. She caught herself on the railing just before hitting the concrete floor, her heart hammering against her ribs, and stood there in the suffocating darkness of her grandmother's old Victorian house, finally admitting what she'd been denying for 3 months. She was utterly, completely lost. Not just in this basement, in everything. The electrical system had failed for the 4th time in as many weeks, and Maya sat down on those damp stairs and cried, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry since her grandmother's funeral, since she'd inherited this beautiful, crumbling house along with all its broken systems and impossible memories. She called the electrician the next morning with swollen eyes and a voice that still carried the weight of her breakdown. Maya had already been through 5 different contractors, each one looking at the ancient wiring with the same expression of someone being asked to resurrect the dead. They'd give her estimates that made her stomach drop, timelines that stretched into impossibility, and then most of them simply stopped returning her calls. She was prepared for the same disappointment. When she dialed the number, her neighbor had pressed into her hand with unusual insistence, prepared for another man in work, boots to walk through her grandmother's house looking at dollar signs instead of the home where Maya had learned to bake bread, where she'd hidden in closets during thunderstorms, where her grandmother had held her after Maya's parents kicked her out at 17 for loving the wrong person. But the person who arrived that rainy Tuesday afternoon wasn't what Maya expected. Jordan stepped out of a white work van with confident, unhurried movements, dark curls pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing work pants that had seen real labor and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms, marked with small scars and stories. She had the kind of face that seemed to exist in multiple times at once, young but weathered, soft but strong, with eyes that took in everything without judgment. When she shook Maya's hand, her grip was warm and sure, and Maya felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with the broken electricity, and everything to do with the way Jordan's eyes crinkled when she smiled and said hello in a voice like smooth whiskey. Jordan spent the first hour just walking through the house, not with a clipboard or a calculator, but with her hands trailing along walls as if learning the bones of the place through touch. Maya followed her from room to room, initially trying to explain the problems, but finding herself instead telling stories about her grandmother, about the reading nook under the stairs where she'd devoured books by flashlight, about the kitchen where 3 generations of women had argued over recipes and life choices and love. Jordan listened in a way that made Maya feel actually heard, asking questions that showed she cared about more than just the electrical panels and outdated fuse boxes. When they reached the attic, dusty and filled with afternoon light streaming through the circular window, Jordan turned to Maya and said something that made tears spring unexpectedly to her eyes. "This house has good bones, and good bones are worth saving, worth fighting for." The work began slowly, carefully. Jordan explained that they couldn't just rip everything out and start over. The house was too old, too particular, and honestly, too precious for that kind of violence. Instead, they would work systematically, room by room, updating what needed updating while preserving what could be saved, respecting the history while making space for a future. She talked about electrical work the way poets talk about language, as if every wire was a sentence, every connection a relationship that mattered. Maya found herself looking forward to Jordan's arrival each morning, the sound of her van in the driveway, becoming the highlight of days that had felt endlessly gray. She started making extra coffee, started finding reasons to work from home instead of the library, started wearing her favorite sweater even though it was probably too warm for the season. They fell into an easy rhythm. Jordan would arrive at 8. Maya would have coffee ready, and they'd spend a few minutes talking before Jordan disappeared into whatever room needed attention that day. But those few minutes started stretching into longer conversations, coffee breaks that turned into shared lunches, discussions about wiring that somehow became discussions about life, about dreams, about the paths they'd both taken to end up here, in this house on a quiet street, in a city that felt simultaneously too big and too small. Jordan talked about learning the trade from her father, about the satisfaction of solving puzzles that other people found impossible, about leaving a corporate job that paid well but left her feeling hollow. Maya talked about her grandmother, about inheriting not just a house but a legacy she wasn't sure she deserved, about working as a freelance graphic designer because traditional offices felt like cages, about relationships that had crumbled because she gave too much or not enough or simply to the wrong people. One afternoon, Jordan was working in the master bedroom, Maya's grandmother's old room that Maya hadn't been able to sleep in, hadn't even been able to clear out properly. The light fixtures had stopped working weeks ago, and Jordan had discovered that mice had chewed through wiring in the walls, creating a fire hazard that made Maya's blood run cold when she thought about what could have happened. Jordan was patient, meticulous, feeding new wire through old walls with the kind of care you'd use handling something precious and fragile. Maya sat on the floor sorting through her grandmother's things, boxes of photographs and letters and small treasures that told the story of a life fully lived. She found a picture of her grandmother as a young woman, standing with another woman, their shoulders pressed together, their eyes holding something that Maya recognized immediately because she'd felt it, lost it, grieved it herself. There was a series of letters tucked behind the photograph, love letters written in her grandmother's careful hand, addressed to a woman named Catherine, spanning years. Maya's hands were shaking when Jordan noticed her silence. When Jordan climbed down from the ladder and sat beside her on the dusty floor without a word, Maya showed her the photograph, the letters, and heard her own voice crack as she said that she'd never known, that her grandmother had never told her, that all those years when Maya was struggling with her own identity and her own heart, her grandmother had been carrying this story in silence. Jordan took the photograph gently, studied it with those careful eyes, and then said something that broke Maya open. Maybe she kept it quiet to protect someone she loved. Maybe she was waiting for the right time to share it. Or maybe she showed you in every other way she could. By loving you exactly as you were. By giving you a place to belong when nowhere else felt safe. Maya cried then, really cried, and Jordan pulled her close without hesitation. Let Maya sob against her shoulder while the afternoon light shifted. Across the room in the old house, settled around them with its creaks and whispers. After that day, something changed between them. The air felt charged, electric in a way that had nothing to do with the wiring Jordan was painstakingly repairing. Their hands would brush when passing tools or coffee cups, and the contact would linger just a moment too long. Their conversations went deeper, later into the evening, Jordan staying well past reasonable work hours because neither of them seemed ready to say goodbye. Maya caught herself watching the way Jordan's muscles moved when she worked, the concentration on her face when she was problem-solving, the gentleness in her hands when she was showing Maya how something worked. And sometimes Maya would look up to find Jordan watching her too, with an expression that made Maya's heart race in her palms, sweat and her whole body feel like it was humming with possibility. The tension built over weeks like a storm gathering strength. They danced around it, both aware, both hesitant, both carrying histories of hurt that made vulnerability feel terrifying. Jordan had been burned before, had given her heart to someone who wanted to keep her hidden, who was ashamed of loving a woman, who worked with her hands, instead of sitting behind a desk in heels and pearls. Maya had loved someone who left when things got hard, who couldn't handle the weight of Maya's grief after her grandmother died, who wanted a partner who was whole and uncomplicated instead of someone still finding her way through loss. They'd both learned to protect themselves, to keep their hearts behind walls built from disappointment and self-preservation. But walls can't stand forever, especially when the foundation shifts beneath them. It happened on a Thursday evening, when Jordan was finishing the last of the bedroom wiring, when Maya brought up dinner and suggested they eat together on the bedroom floor like they'd done a dozen times before. They talked about everything and nothing, about Jordan's dream of starting her own contracting company, focused on historic preservation, about Maya's secret wish to turn part of the house into a studio space where she could teach design to kids who needed creative outlets. They talked until the food was cold and forgotten, until the sky outside turned from gold to purple to deep blue scattered with stars. And then Jordan said something that shifted everything, that working on this house had reminded her what it felt like to care about something beyond just the paycheck, that being around Maya had reminded her what it felt like to want something more than just safety and solitude, that she hadn't meant to develop feelings, but here she was, completely gone for this woman, sitting across from her in the house that was slowly coming back to life. Maya's response caught in her throat, trapped between fear and longing. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways she could get hurt, all the reasons why falling for someone right now when her life was still so uncertain was probably a terrible idea. But then she thought about her grandmother and Catherine, about love kept quiet and hidden away, about opportunities missed and words left unspoken. She thought about the way Jordan had held her when she cried, the way Jordan looked at this house, at her, like something worth saving, worth fighting for. So Maya did something terrifying and brave. She told the truth. She told Jordan that she'd been feeling the same way, that she was scared, but maybe that was okay, that maybe the best things in life were the ones that terrified you into becoming braver than you knew you could be. Jordan kissed her then, soft and careful and full of question, and Maya kissed back with an answer that came from somewhere deeper than logic or fear. They kissed in the room where Maya's grandmother had slept, where she dreamed and loved and kept secrets, and it felt like a blessing, like permission, like the house itself was sighing with satisfaction. The electricity between them had always been there. Maya realized from that very first handshake, building and building until it demanded acknowledgement, until it insisted on being real. The weeks that followed were a kind of magic. Jordan continued working on the house, but now Maya worked alongside her, learning to strip wire and test circuits and understand the hidden systems that kept everything running. They worked during the day and talked late into the night, learning each other's rhythms and quirks in tender places. Jordan was patient and thorough in love the same way she was with electrical work, taking her time, making sure every connection was solid and true. Maya learned that she could be vulnerable without breaking, that she could lean on someone without losing herself, that love didn't have to be a choice between her independence and her heart. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever felt lost in the dark and found your own spark of hope, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means everything and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story about love, courage, and finding light in unexpected places. The house was nearly finished when Maya found the last box in the attic, tucked behind old suitcases and covered in years of dust. Inside were more letters, more photographs, and a journal in her grandmother's handwriting. The final entry, dated just months before she died, talked about Maya, about hoping that she would find her way home, that she would find love without shame, that she would be braver than her grandmother had been, that she would live fully and openly in the truth of who she was. Maya read it aloud to Jordan through tears, and Jordan held her and said that her grandmother would be proud, that she was proud, that this house was becoming exactly what it was meant to be, a home filled with love and light and honesty. Please take a moment to comment below and tell us about a time when someone helped you see your own worth, or when you found courage in an unexpected place. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire me to keep creating content like this. On the day Jordan flipped the final breaker and every light in the house blazed to life, Maya stood in the kitchen where her grandmother had taught her to make pie crust and felt surrounded by brightness that was both literal and metaphorical. The house worked. Her heart worked. She worked. Jordan came up behind her, wrapped arms around her waist, and kissed the back of her neck with familiar affection. They'd taken something broken and made it whole again, not by replacing it entirely, but by honoring what was worth saving while building something new on that foundation. The electrician and the homeowner had both found what they didn't know they were looking for, not just in each other, but in the courage to believe that even the most complicated, outdated, seemingly impossible systems could be repaired with enough patience, skill, and love. The sparks that flew between them had ignited something real and lasting, lighting up not just a house, but two lives that had been stumbling in the dark, searching for home, for connection, for the kind of love that honors the past while building fearlessly toward the future.